The sky above occupied Europe was never silent in the winter of 1944. It roared with the thunder of Allied bomber formations, shook with the crack of German flak, and bled smoke trails from dying aircraft that tumbled earthward like burning leaves. Every mission was a calculated gamble. Every crew knew the odds. And on this frozen February morning, the crew of a Boeing B-17G Flying Fortress, tail number 42 to 31763, nicknamed Lucky 13, lifted off from RAF Ridgewell in Essex, England, bound for a synthetic oil plant deep in Nazi Germany. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Join the 381st Bombardment Group, fly in formation with 300 other B-17s and B-24 Liberators, drop ordnance on the target, and return home. Simple on paper. Deadly in practice. The statistics were merciless. 1 in 4 bombers never came back. 1 in 2 crews would be killed, wounded, or captured before completing their 25-mission tour. And yet, 23-year-old Captain James "Jim" McKnight sat in the left seat of Lucky 13, his gloved hands steady on the yoke, his jaw set with the quiet determination of a man who had already survived 18 missions and refused to believe the 19th would be his last. Beside him, co-pilot Lieutenant Robert "Bobby" Harmon scanned the instrument panel with the focused intensity of a chess player anticipating his opponent's next move. Behind them, in the cramped fuselage of the bomber, 8 other men occupied their stations: bombardier, navigator, flight engineer, radio operator, ball turret gunner, waist gunners, and tail gunner. They were farm boys and factory workers, college students and high school dropouts, bound together by training, duty, and the thin aluminum skin of a 4-engine aircraft hurtling toward flak-filled skies at 25,000 feet. The formation climbed into the pale winter light, engines droning in synchronized harmony. Below, the English countryside disappeared beneath a quilt of clouds. Ahead, the coast of France approached, then passed beneath them like a memory. The North Sea glittered cold and gray. Radio chatter crackled intermittently. Call signs, headings, altitude checks. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. Until it wasn't. They were over Belgium when the first burst of flak found them. Black puffs of smoke erupted around the formation like deadly flowers blooming in slow motion. The bomber shuddered as shrapnel punched through the fuselage, tearing jagged holes in the metal skin. McKnight felt the aircraft lurch, heard the sharp ping of metal fragments ricocheting inside the cockpit. Then came the explosion, a bright orange flash off the starboard wing. Engine number 3 coughed, belched black smoke, and died. "Number 3's out," Harmon shouted, his voice tight but controlled. "Feathering the prop." McKnight nodded, his eyes locked on the formation ahead. Losing one engine was manageable. The B-17 was designed for this. But the formation was pulling ahead now, and Lucky 13 was falling behind, slipping out of the protective bubble of massed firepower that kept German fighters at bay. McKnight pushed the throttles forward, coaxing more power from the remaining 3 engines. The aircraft shuddered, held altitude, kept pace. For 10 minutes, they flew on. The target appeared ahead, a sprawl of industrial buildings wreathed in smoke from earlier waves of bombers. The bombardier, Lieutenant Carl Jensen, called out headings and adjustments. The bomb bay doors groaned open. The aircraft lifted slightly as 6,000 pounds of high-explosive ordnance dropped away, tumbling toward the oil refinery below. "Bombs away!" Jensen's voice crackled over the intercom. "Let's get the hell out of here." McKnight banked left, following the formation into the turn for home. And that's when engine number 4 began to die. It started with a vibration, a low, ominous shudder that traveled through the airframe like the warning tremor before an earthquake. Then came the knock, the unmistakable metallic hammering of a failing engine. Oil pressure dropped. Temperature spiked. The propeller windmilled uselessly, then seized. "Number 4's gone." Harmon's voice was no longer calm. "We're losing oil pressure fast. 2 engines out. 2 engines remaining." and 600 miles of hostile airspace between Lucky 13 and home. McKnight's hands tightened on the yoke. The formation was pulling away now, disappearing into the distance like a ghost fleet. The sky around them was suddenly, terrifyingly empty. And somewhere below, German fighters were circling, waiting for stragglers. The radio operator, Sergeant Mike Callahan, leaned forward from his station. "Skipper, radio's dead. Took shrapnel. We can't call for help." McKnight didn't respond. He didn't need to. The crew already knew what this meant. They were alone, crippled, silent, and the long, brutal flight home had just begun. The silence on the radio was more than just the absence of sound. It was the absence of connection, of rescue, of hope. Without radio contact, Lucky 13 was invisible to Allied fighters that might provide escort. Invisible to air-sea rescue crews that could fish them out of the North Sea if they went down. Invisible to the world except for the German radar operators tracking their limping progress across occupied Europe. McKnight held the yoke with both hands, feeling every vibration, every shudder, every complaint of the overworked engines. The two remaining right cyclone radials, engines number 1 and 2 on the port wing, were screaming now, pushed beyond their rated limits, burning oil, overheating. The aircraft was descending. Not rapidly, but inevitably. They had crossed into Germany at 25,000 feet. Now they were at 18,000. In another hour, they'd be below 10,000. And at that altitude, they'd be easy prey. "How much fuel we got?" McKnight asked, his voice flat, mechanical. Harmon checked the gauges, did the math in his head. "At this rate? Maybe enough to make the coast. Maybe. Maybe isn't good enough. It's all we got, Jim." Behind them, the crew worked in grim silence. The flight engineer, Staff Sergeant Eddie Kowalski, crawled through the fuselage inspecting damage. Holes the size of fists punctured the aluminum skin, letting in screaming wind and sub-zero cold. The oxygen system was compromised. The hydraulics were leaking. The ball turret gunner, Sergeant Tommy Rizzo, was stuck halfway out of his rotating sphere, his face white with cold and fear. "Eddie, we need that turret operational," McKnight called back. "Working on it, sir," Kowalski replied, his breath visible in the frozen air. "Hydraulic lines are shot to hell, but I think I can rig something." The navigator, Lieutenant William Bill Stark, hunched over his charts, calculating and recalculating their position. Without radio, without reliable instruments, he was navigating by dead reckoning, using airspeed, heading, and elapsed time to estimate their position. It was guesswork dressed up as science, and they all knew it. "If we hold this heading," Stark called out, "we should hit the Belgian coast in 90 minutes. Then another hour over the Channel. But we're losing altitude fast, Jim. We might not make it." "We'll make it," McKnight said. It wasn't confidence. It was defiance. The sky around them was too quiet. The formation was long gone. The cloud cover had thinned, and Lucky 13 was silhouetted against the winter sky like a wounded bird advertising its vulnerability. McKnight scanned the horizon, knowing what was coming before he saw it. "Bandits! 11 o'clock high." The call came from the top turret gunner, Sergeant Ray Brennan. McKnight snapped his head left and saw them, two dark specks diving out of the sun. Focke-Wulf FW-190s. Fast, deadly, and closing fast. "Gunners, heads up!" McKnight barked. "Hold your fire until they're in range." The FW-190s came in from the port side, cannon fire winking from their wings. Tracers arced toward Lucky 13 in lazy, deceptive curves. Then the rounds hit, pinging off the fuselage, shattering plexiglass, punching through aluminum. The top turret erupted in a roar of .50 caliber fire, the twin barrels swinging to track the attackers. Brass casings rattled across the deck. The smell of cordite filled the air. One of the FW-190s broke off, trailing smoke. The other rolled inverted and came back for another pass, this time from the starboard side. The waist gunners opened up, their guns hammering, the fuselage shaking with recoil. The German fighter flashed past, close enough that McKnight could see the pilot's face, see the yellow nose cone, see the black crosses on the wings. Then it was gone, spiraling away, either hit or conserving ammunition. The sky was empty again. "Everyone okay?" McKnight called out. "Brennan's hit," Kowalski shouted. "Top turret." McKnight couldn't leave the controls. Harmon half rose from his seat, but McKnight waved him back down. "Stay on the instruments, Bobby. Eddie, take care of Ray." Kowalski scrambled up to the turret. Brennan was slumped over his guns, blood soaking through his jacket. A cannon shell fragment had caught him in the shoulder, not fatal, but bad. Kowalski dragged him down, applied a pressure bandage, gave him a shot of morphine from the first aid kit. "He'll live," Kowalski reported. "But he's out of action." McKnight nodded. "One gunner down. 2 engines down. Radio down. Still over enemy territory. And the engines were getting hotter." "Oil temp on number 1 is redlining," Harmon said quietly. "We need to throttle back or we'll lose it. If we throttle back, we'll lose altitude faster. If we don't throttle back, the engine seizes and we lose altitude anyway." McKnight closed his eyes for half a second, ran the calculations. There was no good choice. Only less bad choices. "Cut it back," he said. 10%. Harmon eased the throttle. The engine temperature stabilized. The aircraft descended faster. They crossed the German-Belgian border at 12,000 feet. The landscape below was a patchwork of snow-covered fields, dark forests, and rivers frozen solid. Towns passed beneath them, small and indifferent. Somewhere down there, German soldiers were looking up, tracking their progress, calling in their position. "How much farther, Bill?" McKnight asked. Stark bent over his charts, his pencil moving in small, precise arcs. 80 miles to the coast. Maybe less. 80 miles. At their current speed and descent rate, they'd be at 5,000 feet by the time they reached the channel. Low enough for small arms fire. Low enough for flak batteries. Low enough to see the faces of the men trying to kill them. But they were still flying. Still heading west. Still alive. And in the frozen cockpit of Lucky 13, Captain Jim McKnight held the yoke steady and refused to let go. The Belgian coast appeared through the haze like a thin gray line, half hope, half mirage. They had been flying for over 4 hours, and every minute had been a battle against gravity, physics, and the cruel mathematics of fuel consumption. Lucky 13 was now at 7,000 feet, descending at 200 feet per minute, engines number 1 and 2 howling in protest, gauges flickering in the red. "Coast ahead," Stark called out, his voice cracking with exhaustion and relief. 10 miles. McKnight allowed himself one breath of cautious optimism. 10 miles. Then the North Sea. Then another 60 miles of freezing water. Then England. Home. Safety. If the engines held. If the fuel lasted. If. They crossed the coast at 6,500 feet. Below them, the gray waters of the channel churned with whitecaps. The temperature inside the aircraft had dropped to well below freezing. The crew was wrapped in every layer they had, but still they shivered, their breath coming in ragged clouds. Brennan lay unconscious in the radio compartment, his wound bandaged but seeping. Rizzo had finally been freed from the ball turret and now crouched by the waist gun, scanning the sky for more fighters. The radio operator, Callahan, had spent the past hour trying to jury-rig the shattered equipment, splicing wires, testing circuits. Nothing worked. They were still silent. Still alone. "How's the fuel, Bobby?" McKnight asked. Harmon tapped the gauges, as if physical contact might change the reading. 30 minutes. Maybe 40 if we're lucky. How far to the English coast? 50 miles. The math was simple and brutal. They weren't going to make it. McKnight felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. He could ditch in the channel, try to put the bomber down on the water and hope they all survived the impact, hope they could get the life rafts deployed before the aircraft sank, hope someone saw them go down and sent rescue. Or he could keep flying, push the engines until they quit, and try to glide the remaining distance. One choice gave them a chance in the water. The other gave them a chance in the air. Neither was good. He was about to make that choice when engine number 2 made it for him. The explosion was small, a sharp bang followed by a plume of black smoke. The engine didn't seize. It caught fire. "Number 2's on fire," Harmon shouted, his hand already reaching for the extinguisher controls. Flames licked back from the cowling, bright orange against the gray sky. The fire suppression system discharged, a burst of CO2 that smothered the flames for exactly 3 seconds. Then the fire returned, angrier, hungrier, feeding on oil and hydraulic fluid. "It's not going out." Harmon's voice was sharp with panic. "Feather it. Cut the fuel," McKnight ordered. Harmon slammed the controls. The propeller blades rotated to their minimum drag position. The fuel line shut off. The fire continued to burn. "It's spreading to the wing," Kowalski called from behind them. McKnight glanced left. Flames were crawling along the leading edge of the port wing, melting paint, scorching aluminum. If the fire reached the fuel tanks, the wing would explode. If the wing exploded, they'd tumble out of the sky and hit the water at 200 miles per hour. No one would survive. "Eddie, get the extinguishers from the back and spray that wing," McKnight barked. Kowalski grabbed 2 handheld extinguishers and scrambled toward the waist section. He opened the side window, an act of insanity at 200 miles per hour, and leaned out into the slipstream, aiming the extinguisher at the flames. The wind tore at him, nearly ripping him out of the aircraft. The waist gunners grabbed his legs, held him in place. He pulled the trigger. White foam sprayed across the wing, dissipating instantly in the wind. He tried again. And again. The fire didn't go out, but it stopped spreading. "That's all I can do," Kowalski shouted, pulling himself back inside, his face red and raw from the wind. McKnight looked at the altimeter. 4,000 feet. Then at the fuel gauge. 10 minutes, maybe. Then at engine number 1, the last engine, the only thing keeping them airborne. It was redlining. Overheating. Shaking so badly the entire airframe vibrated. And 40 miles ahead, through the haze and the sea spray, McKnight saw it, the white cliffs of Dover. "There," he shouted, pointing. "I can see England." The crew surged forward, peering through the windows. And for a moment, despite the fire, despite the dying engine, despite everything, they allowed themselves to believe they might actually make it. Engine number 1 disagreed. The knock came first, a deep, rhythmic hammering like a giant fist pounding on metal. Then the vibration increased, shaking the yoke in McKnight's hands. Then the oil pressure dropped to 0. The temperature spiked into the red. The propeller began to windmill uncontrollably. "We're losing number 1," Harmon said, his voice hollow. McKnight didn't respond. He was already calculating. Altitude, 3,500 feet. Distance to shore, 35 miles. Glide ratio, roughly 10-to-1 in ideal conditions, which meant they could glide about 6 miles before hitting the water. They were going to crash 30 miles short of England. "Prepare for ditching," McKnight said quietly. "Everybody to crash positions. Get Brennan secured. Deploy life rafts on my command. Bobby, send out a mayday on the emergency frequency." "Radio's still dead, Jim." then fire a flare. Harmon reached for the flare pistol, loaded a red cartridge, and fired it through the overhead hatch. The flare arced into the sky, trailing red smoke, a desperate SOS to anyone watching. Engine number 1 seized. The propeller stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. Lucky 13 became a glider. McKnight trimmed the aircraft for best glide speed, 125 miles per hour, and nosed down slightly. The altimeter unwound steadily. 3,000 feet. 2,500 feet. 2,000 feet. The white cliffs of Dover grew larger, but not fast enough. The crew was silent. Each man alone with his thoughts, his fears, his regrets. Some prayed. Some checked their Mae West life jackets for the 10th time. Some simply stared out the windows at the gray water rising to meet them. At 1,000 feet, McKnight saw the patrol boat. It was small, a British Royal Navy motor torpedo boat, white wake trailing behind it as it raced toward them. They'd seen the flare. They were coming. But they were too far away. At 500 feet, McKnight made his final decision. "Hold on," he shouted. "We're putting her down." He aimed for the smoothest patch of water he could see, an area between the swells where the surface looked almost calm. He held the nose up, bled off speed, kept the wings level. The water rushed up at them, gray and cold and merciless. The tail hit first. The impact slammed everyone forward against their restraints. Then the fuselage belly flopped onto the surface with a deafening crash. Water exploded around them, smashing through the shattered nose, flooding the cockpit. The aircraft skipped once, twice, then nosed down. The cold was instant and shocking. Water poured in from a dozen breaches. "Out! Out! Out!" McKnight screamed. The crew scrambled for the exits. Kowalski kicked open the waist door. Rizzo and Callahan dragged Brennan toward the opening. Harmon pulled the life raft release. The raft inflated with a hiss, spilled out into the water. Men jumped, splashed, swam, pulled each other into the raft. McKnight was the last one out. He stood in the cockpit, water up to his chest, looking at the instruments one final time. Then he hauled himself out through the top hatch just as Lucky 13 began her final descent into the depths. The patrol boat reached them 6 minutes later. All 10 men were pulled from the water. Cold. Exhausted. Alive. As the patrol boat turned toward Dover, McKnight watched Lucky 13 disappear beneath the waves, tail first, then the fuselage, finally the wings, until there was nothing left but ripples and debris. The blankets were coarse wool, scratchy against their skin, but warmer than anything McKnight had felt in months. He sat hunched on a bench in the patrol boat's cramped cabin, shivering violently despite the layers wrapped around him. Around him, his crew did the same, pale, silent, staring at nothing. Only the low throb of the boat's engines and the slap of waves against the hull broke the silence. Brennan lay on a stretcher, conscious now, his eyes glassy from morphine. A British sailor knelt beside him, checking his bandage, murmuring reassurances. The shoulder wound would heal. He'd fly again, maybe. Or maybe not. It didn't matter right now. What mattered was that they were alive. The white cliffs of Dover rose ahead, stark and beautiful in the fading afternoon light. The patrol boat slowed as it entered the harbor, navigating between anchored destroyers and cargo ships. On the dock, an ambulance waited, along with a cluster of officers and medical personnel. Word had already spread, a B-17 had gone down 30 miles out, crew rescued. Another story for the debriefing reports. Another line in the casualty logs. But McKnight knew it was more than that. They carried Brennan off first, loaded him into the ambulance with practiced efficiency. The rest of the crew followed, shuffling down the gangway on legs that barely supported their weight. A young RAF officer met them at the bottom, clipboard in hand, his expression neutral. "Captain McKnight?" "That's me." "Welcome back, sir." Medical will check you over, then we'll need a full debrief. Intelligence will want to know everything. What you saw, where you went down, enemy activity. McKnight nodded. He'd done this before. The debriefing was standard procedure. But as he walked toward the waiting transport truck, something inside him cracked. The adrenaline that had kept him sharp, kept him focused, kept him flying for 5.5 hours drained away all at once. His legs buckled. Harmon caught him. "I got you, Jim," the co-pilot said quietly. "I got you." They didn't speak on the ride back to Ridgewell. The truck rumbled through the English countryside, past hedgerows and farms and pubs with warm lights glowing in the windows. Normal life. Civilian life. A world that seemed impossibly distant from the one they'd just left. At the base, they were separated, sent to medical, to interrogation rooms, to hot showers and clean uniforms. McKnight sat across from a young intelligence officer who asked questions in a calm, clinical voice. How many fighters attacked? What was the flak density over the target? How long did the engines run after being hit? McKnight answered mechanically, his mind elsewhere. When it was over, the officer closed his notebook and looked at McKnight with something that might have been respect. "You brought them all home, Captain. That's something." McKnight didn't respond. He wasn't sure he'd brought them home. He'd brought them to the water. The patrol boat had done the rest. 3 days later, McKnight stood in the briefing room, facing the same map, the same rows of wooden chairs, the same young faces preparing for the same deadly missions. The group commander had asked him to say a few words, to share what he'd learned, to pass on whatever wisdom a 19-mission veteran could offer to crews who might not survive their first. He looked at them, these boys who shaved twice a week and wrote letters to girls back home and believed, despite all evidence to the contrary, that they were invincible. He remembered being one of them. "You all know what happened to Lucky 13, he began. 2 engines out over Germany. Radio dead. 600 miles to fly on 2 dying engines. We didn't think we'd make it. Hell, by every calculation, we shouldn't have made it." He paused, looking down at his hands. They were steady now. They hadn't been 3 days ago. But we did. You want to know why? Not because we were better pilots. Not because we were lucky, though God knows we needed that too. We made it because every man on that plane did his job. The engineer kept the engines running past their limits. The gunners kept the fighters off us. The navigator got us home when we had no instruments. The co-pilot never stopped believing we could make it. And the crew. He looked up. The crew never quit. One of the young bombardiers raised his hand. "Sir, what do you do when you know the odds are against you? When you know you probably won't make it?" McKnight was quiet for a long moment. "You fly the plane," he said finally. "That's all you can do. You don't think about the odds. You don't think about the 600 miles or the 2 dead engines or the fighters waiting for you. You think about the next 5 minutes. You solve the problem in front of you. And then you solve the next one. And you keep doing that until either you're home or you're not. But you never, ever stop flying the plane." The room was silent. "That's all I've got," McKnight said. "Don't waste your luck. Don't waste each other. And when things go to hell, because they will, remember that the plane wants to fly. Your job is to let it." The final mission report for Lucky 13 was filed 3 weeks later. The bomber was listed as lost in action, ditched in the North Sea, crew rescued. The aircraft had logged 147 combat missions across 3 different crews before McKnight's. It had absorbed over 400 flak hits, survived 6 fighter attacks, lost engines on 4 separate occasions, and brought every crew home. Until the last one, when it gave everything it had left. McKnight flew 7 more missions before his tour ended. He rotated back to the States in April 1944, trained new pilots in Florida, and never spoke publicly about the day Lucky 13 went down. Some stories, he believed, were too personal to share. Some memories belonged only to the men who lived them. But on quiet nights, when sleep wouldn't come, he'd lie awake and remember the cold, the fire, the dying engines, the gray water rising up. And he'd remember the 10 men who trusted him to get them home. He did. Barely. But he did. And in the mathematics of war, barely is sometimes enough.